The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. It is Thursday, the 10th of July, 2025. We are live here at CHD TV with Financial Rebellion. Good morning, Catherine. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning,
Holly.
Well, we have some headlines. Let's start with the headlines, and then we'll talk about what this show is going to be about. So first up on our headline, it's Barbie. Barbie launches first doll with type 1 diabetes with a glucose monitor. Now, why, Catherine and Carolyn, on earth would they want to normalize type 1 diabetes like that?
I think they want to normalize wearables.
Oh.
Yeah, wearables. Normalize. And it's interesting. Defender last week had a great two articles, one from Charles Eisenstein, one from Josh Stauman, talking about, are wearables dangerous or not, that are very interesting. But, I believe they're building up to the Internet of Bodies because glucose monitors include, the new Surgeon General has a glucose monitor company where you stick a wire under the skin. So I think this is to normalize wearables, which is an absolutely, in my opinion, dreadful idea. If you look at what children need to learn about how to take care of their health, learning how to have type 1 diabetes and glucose monitors is not high on my list.
Or sending your personal health information into some
control grid. Right. Right. We're going to be talking about intelligence agencies and how they use data to control people today. And so teaching children how to send their data into the surveillance networks is really not a good idea.
No, and also Barbie's not a good idea. I just find the whole thing freaky. There's that. All right, next headline. Cash is freedom, use it or lose it. Government is planning to introduce programmable digital currency. I think this is a British thing, is it, Catherine?
Yeah, so a wonderful viewer sent this in. Was walking down the street in the UK and saw this sign, took a picture and sent it in. And so we just had to run this. But this is when people say, what can I do? This is a great thing. Put these posters up everywhere. And it's really spreading the word. So this is great. And we really thank you for sending it in.
Yeah, we do. And thank you, Brits, for doing it. Fight on. Okay. Next headline. Roundtable, public banking, why public funds should be deposited in publicly owned banks. Catherine?
So this is a great piece by Ellen Brown, who's been head of the Public Banking Institute, or she's one of the founders of the Public Banking Institute. And one of the things it describes is how much of our transactions involve interest expense. It's frightening. And she also describes the fact that so many state and local governments are depositing their money in a way where it goes into financial centers and doesn't go back to do things that support the tax base. It's a very well-written, well-reasoned article, and it helps you understand some of the very important issues, financial issues at the state and local level.
Okay, excellent. Well, look, this show is called Who Controls the Control Files and the $21 trillion. So what does that even mean?
Well, why don't we start with Carolyn describing the term of the day? So we define control files, and then I'll connect it to the 21 trillion that we've been covering for years now on Financial Rebellion. So Carolyn, turning it over to you, term of the day. What is a control file?
Okay. Well, I looked up on the internet and said, what's a control file? Now, you're not going to get the sense in which we're using it, but it says a control file can refer to different things depending on the context, but generally it is a small file used to manage, configure, or control a process, program, or system. And I would add human being, right? And the context in which we use the people currently are using the term who are not IT people is that intelligence networks and others who want to control political processes or people gather information that's negative on them and maybe even use a honeypot or some some uh, thing that will make people look bad, like the Epstein sexual deviancy, and collect that information and then can use that information for blackmail purposes. And I mean, it's my opinion, just my opinion, that there are not very many people in public office at very high levels who do not have a control file. Because in the system where there are people we may not even know about who decide whether somebody's going to get a position or not, or going to run for Congress or the Senate, they don't want somebody they can't control. So I'm not saying every single person up there on the Hill is controlled with a control file, but we have evidence that many of them, well, the Epstein logs are an example.
We have an article at Solari on control files that I wrote at the same time we published a very deep interview with John Rappaport, going through the heavily documented cases of pedophilia where clearly pedophilia networks had been used to create control files. So it's called political control and pedophilia because there's a relationship. You know, control files can include financial fraud or other things, but pedophilia is one of the popular ways of doing it. And so we do a deep dive on some of the cases that have been documented. But Nick Bryant is one of the people we've interviewed on the Solari report. So we did one with Nick Bryant just on the Franklin cover-up, which he was very serious and did a very serious investigation. But he's also done serious investigations of the Epstein, and of course Epstein's in the news. And he did an interview with Sean Ryan where he described why he did not believe that the Epstein files.
Blackmail plays an integral.
So let's play that.
Oh, and I've been at this for 21 years, and Epstein had cameras in all of his homes. I mean, Epstein was definitely a blackmail artist. And the government wants to make sure that does not come out, that a huge part of our political system is predicated on blackmail. And especially if that dark, malignant corner of the intelligence that is using blackmail against our politicians and other people, if they were using children, I mean, that would make the American people erupt. So that's why that Wikipedia page is locked down. And that's why this is important. This is, for that dark corner of intelligence, this is Omaha Beach. You know, they're not going to give an inch because this is the last thing that they want out. And it's amazing how the Epstein scandal has been covered up. If you look at all the victims and all the perpetrators and all the procurers involved in the Epstein network, I mean, we're talking score, and the people that facilitated it, like the pilots and like Epstein's house managers and the cooks and everybody else. We're talking scores and scores of people, and no one's been indicted except for Ghislaine Maxwell. And that really shows that our government, unfortunately, wants to stop it there. Our government does not, I mean, although Americans do, I think, are coming around to the belief that Epstein was taking part in blackmail, or a lot of them, it doesn't make sense. Why is our government aiding and abetting child trafficking? Unless they're protecting some very powerful people and a political process, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way that it makes sense.
Okay, so what Carolyn and I wanted to do today is go through what is happening. So Epstein is in the news. You see a lot of people upset. They had expected the administration to disclose more in the Epstein files. The administration is basically saying no, nothing other than what's been disclosed is going to be disclosed. You hear some very disappointed people, but we want to talk about what is happening and why. and as important, what it means to you and what you should do. If you want change, what this means to the tactics you and I can use to get real meaningful change. So before I dive in on sort of point number one, Carolyn, anything else on control files?
Well, just that this has been going on for a long time. I actually lived in Omaha when Franklin cover-up was exposed, and Omaha is where Boys Town was. And there was a very important book that came out, and a guy who was involved in that, who was a whistleblower, died mysteriously. So this has been going on for a long time, and now people are to some extent becoming aware of it. But the connection to the connection to money we're going to be talking about.
So the Franklin cover-up blew up when I was at HUD, and I was working for somebody who, and I didn't realize it, but at the same time it blew up in the Washington Times, he literally was clearly being squeezed by blackmail. And I watched him, he was ordering me to do something illegal, which I refused to do. But I've never seen a man more terrified in his life. And, in the materials we've covered with HUD, I've gone into that story. And when I do the interview with John Rappaport, I talk about it. But it showed me how powerful control files are, because they can literally, you can get a control file on somebody, and not only will they lose their job and their assets, they'll lose their family, they'll lose their friends, they'll lose their social position, and that the terror, that you can see in somebody is being squeezed by one of those files is immense. Okay, so let's start off. I want to talk about three major points about what you're watching with the unwillingness by the administration to disclose any further material about the Epstein files. The first point I want to make is it's highly likely that, and it's impossible for me to conceive otherwise, Epstein was an intelligence asset. This was someone who was working for what was probably a consortium of intelligence agencies. Let's start with this article. The former Secretary of Labor under the first Trump administration had been vetted and had told the administration that he, when he was a prosecutor in Florida, he was told to leave Epstein alone because he belonged to intelligence. And that's how you'll see a U.S. attorney or a district attorney tipped off, no, this guy's an intelligence asset, you need to leave him alone. And one of the reasons is under military operations or intelligence operations, you can have somebody doing something that is illegal under, national or state law, but is considered to be okay if you're doing it on behalf of the intelligence operation. And so if you look at Epstein's history, his access to capital, this is not a man who earned his way into being a billionaire. But suddenly he had magical access to real estate. He had access to capital. He had access to associations that, sort of in a sudden darling pattern that typically looks like, he's operating on behalf of intelligence agencies. And if you look at his association, he clearly was. If you want to understand more about Epstein and the networks that supported and promoted him, by far and away, the best investigative journalism on this topic is Whitney Webb, who wrote two books, Volume 1 and Volume 2 of One Nation Under Blackmail. And she goes through the whole history of the organized crime and intelligence agencies that led up to this operation. And what you see is very significant ties to both organized crime, and I would describe this as both Israeli, U.S., and British intelligence agencies. So clearly, an intelligence network that clearly involves foreign intelligence agencies, which is one of the sensitivities here, because you're talking about deep compromise of U.S. financial and other interests and political figures by foreign intelligence agencies or involving foreign intelligence agencies. So point number one, Einstein was probably or highly likely an intelligence asset. Therefore, he's sponsored and working for government, and he has government clearances and air cover to do what he's doing. Anything you want to add, Carolyn?
Well, remember that he was involved with, I think it was J.P. Morgan Chase in all sorts of money laundering operations too. So, you know,
Right.
it's a
Right.
money.
I'm gonna get into money laundering because in my opinion, Epstein, what the public has heard a lot about are the victims of the sex trafficking talking about Epstein and control files, but nobody creates control files unless they have a reason for using them or wanting them. And the reality, this was a period, the Epstein operation. So let's go back to what Whitney Webb has taught us. In 1994, the National Economic Advisor took Epstein to the White House, to the Clinton White House. And from that point, I think until Clinton left the White House, Epstein visited the White House, I think maybe 19 times. And Rubin, who was the National Economic Advisor, then becomes the Secretary of Treasury. And when he does, the 21 trillion starts disappearing, 20 trillion from Department of Defense and $1 trillion from HUD. And what I believe, having tried to understand, and so here's our website at Solari, we have extensive documentation on the 21 trillion, and it started to go missing in 1998, which was it was fiscal 1998, so it was the spring of 1997, the year that it was that spring that the one of the top pension fund leaders in the country said they have given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall, which is why I call it a financial coup. So, so, so the Epstein operation very much parallels the years and when extraordinary amounts of money go missing. Um, anyway, so let's turn to why do we know the FBI and the Department of Justice have extensive files on Epstein? And the reason we know is, first of all, we've seen numerous lawsuits against Epstein or his estate by many, many different people claiming to be victims. And in fact, after his death, part of his estate was set aside for a victim compensation fund. We've had payouts to, I think, it's 150 plus claimants with an average of about 3/4 to a million per person. So you're talking about hundreds, more than 100 victims getting 750 to $1 million a person. That doesn't happen unless there's real there. But the other thing you've seen is enormous litigation, including from the U.S. attorney in the Virgin Islands against banks, including J.P. Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank. And so we've had these huge payouts and settlements from this litigation. One of the problems with the litigation is each time the litigation happens, whether it's relative to the banks or the victims, a huge amount of money, a huge amount of information comes out. And of course, banks don't pay huge settlements to get rid of litigation unless they have reason to want to hush everything up. So in June 2023, JP Morgan reached a tentative settlement of 290 million. In September 2023, they agreed to pay 75 million to the Virgin Islands for similar claims. We're talking big money here. So and then we have many announcements of regulatory actions and investigations by Department of Justice and FBI. So all of these activities always create enormous amounts of file, especially in a country where the control grid and surveillance is as significant as in the United States. So, and remember, Epstein, of course, had many, many bank accounts running these different operations, and the banks all agreed to transact for him, despite the fact that he was a convicted felon. He had been convicted of pedophilia, and had basically served a home arrest sentence over the whole thing. Anyway, so I dare say, Carolyn, if you and I had a file like that, if we had a felony rep, I doubt we could get a bank account in America.
Could I say something about Bob Rubin?
Sure.
Bob Rubin was an alum of Goldman Sachs. So, I mean, you got to understand the bankers, in particular, the central bankers, are deeply involved in this.
So I just have to remind you, before he went into the administration, he was chairman of the Harvard Endowment or Corporation. Okay. So, and co-chair of Goldman Sachs, right?
And this
So,
is who took people to the White House with, clear connections with Epstein. And one time, I've been associated with Catherine for a very long time, and I had a reporter tell me, I said, I'm nobody. I don't do anything. And she said, because I was associated with Catherine, she said, Bob Rubin knows exactly who you are. Oh, really? I'm nobody. And Bob Rubin knows exactly who I am because I'm associated with Catherine. So, I mean, that shows you how deep at least some people believe, how deep this goes.
So as soon as Clinton left the White House, he literally jumped on a plane with Epstein and started running around the world collecting money to launder back into the Clinton Foundation. One of my questions is, why would all these countries give hundreds of millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation? Makes you wonder where it came from. Anyway, so we know the FBI has files for all that reason, but we also know, because that's what we've been told. So the current Attorney General, Pam Bondi, used to be the Attorney General for Florida. When she was discussing and the fact that they were going to try and make the Epstein files public, basically said some of the files were on her desk. So take a look.
One of the things that you alluded to, and this is something Donald Trump has talked about, the DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review. That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that.
Right, and one of the unfortunate things is the statement from the administration is there are no client files. So how there could be no client files when Pam Bondi said they were on their desk, and she had referred to the fact that they had hoped to but didn't get all the files from New York and were working to get all the files down from New York. So anyway, so there's clearly a reversal by members of the administration at the Department of Justice and FBI that's got everybody scratching their head. Now, let's talk about why a group of people who were interested in making the files public would change their mind. Why do you get, successive administrations ultimately coming to the conclusion that they're not going to make any of this public and they're not going to pursue any enforcement actions? So, and it's extraordinary to Carolyn and me because we spent 11 years and countless hours working for free and millions of dollars litigating over false allegations. So the fact that there are this many real allegations and there's no enforcement pursuit is quite extraordinary. Anyway, but let's talk about why that might happen. But first, I want to show you a very wonderful clip from the corporate media. But this was grabbed. They certainly didn't mean for this to come out. This was grabbed by Project Veritas. Quite a coup by Project Veritas. Let's take a look.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. First of all, I was told, who's Jeffrey Epstein? No one knows who that is. This is a stupid story. Then the palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will that also quashed the story. And then Alan Dershowitz was also implicated in it because of the planes. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. We convinced her to talk to us. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton. We had everything. I tried for 3 years to get it on, to no avail, and now it's all coming out, and it's like these new revelations, and I freaking had all of it. I'm so pissed right now. Like, every day I get more and more pissed because I'm just like, oh my God, what we had was unreal. Other women backing it up. Hey, yep. Brad Edwards, the attorney, 3 years ago, saying there will come a day when we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific pedophile this country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
That's really painful if you're a reporter. So this was when the revelations finally came out. I think it was after he was arrested, and I think it was 2019 or whenever it was. Okay, so let's talk about what could explain this fact pattern. And now Carolyn and I are going to go into a series of reality about how the United States federal government works and how our world works that we have covered countless times on the Solari Report. We've covered it on Financial Rebellion, and but it hasn't gotten through yet. And I'm not going to tell the story of the red button story, but we'll put the link up in the show notes. If you haven't watched the story of the red button, I strongly recommend you do. And it talks to our dependency as a society on organized crime and war, and the fact that the general population really supports doing whatever we have to do to get their check. They just don't want to know about it. And the reality is the people who run the financial system and the people who run the government have to know about it and have to deal with it. And that's why you get, we get an overt part of the economy and we get a covert part of the economy. And at moments like this, national security law has to rise up and essentially assert control. And I would point out that Operation Warp Speed, as far as I know, Polly, I think is still going on. But under national security law, I have been told, and I cannot prove this in a court of law, but I've been told repeatedly that people like like a Pam Bondi are basically told this is an issue under national security law, and if you disclose it, you will go to prison, for 30 years. So, this is the reason why people who are running companies or people in important government positions suddenly do an about face, because they've gotten the speech from the people who control the national security law to inform them under the law they may not say anything. That they basically have a muzzle over them. So any comment on that one, Carolyn?
No, it's just, that's the way it works.
That's the way it works. Okay. The second thing is, another reason you would not want this coming out and you would suppress it is we're in the middle of several wars around the world. And if the truth of the Epstein networks come out, it could be unbelievably damaging to various relationships. The relationship between the administration and the intelligence agencies, the relationship between U.S. intelligence agencies and Israeli intelligence agencies, and the relationship with British intelligence agencies, because you're talking about something that could start to unravel threads that could put people in those intelligence agencies at risk or upset them tremendously. So remember, if you're an intelligence agency and you're trying to run operations like this, you need to protect your operators from disclosure. You're asking them to do these things, and you have an obligation to protect them. And if you don't protect the ones that did the Epstein operation, you could bring transparency to people who are running current operations, or they could get scared because they're saying, look, you're not protecting us. And so you don't want your current operations to disassemble, whether it's between different countries or between different intelligence agencies or different divisions with an intelligence agency. You could get some really dangerous fights breaking out. Now, one of the big questions here is Israeli intelligence, because the rumors and allegations about Epstein's relationship to, the question was he an asset of the Israeli intelligence or American intelligence? I still, wherever the American and Israeli intelligence are, I always find British intelligence back there somewhere. But anyway, let's play a video of Wilkerson. Larry Wilkerson was the chief of staff to Powell at State, but before State, he was over at the Pentagon with Powell, working for Powell when he was running the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So let's play Wilkerson describing the role of the Mossad over at the Pentagon during this period when Epstein was in his full glory.
And it's unquestionable that the Epstein business was heavily influenced, let me put it that way, by Mossad.
And so that's somehow emblematic on these huge geopolitical issues.
Yes, I watched Mossad take over the Pentagon. in 2002. The Pentagon was infiltrated by Mossad. They did not need any identification to get through the river entrance of the building. They went upstairs to Douglas Feith, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, the third most powerful man in the Defense Department. Occasionally, they went to the second most powerful man, Paul Wolfowitz, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and they had run of the Pentagon. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, said to my boss one time, "Hell, I don't run my building. Mossad does."
Okay, so this was at the same time that $20 trillion was marching out of the door of the Pentagon. So we have Epstein in his full glory, and if I'm right, I think that what has come out on the sex is a tiny part of the full story. I think it's really a financial money laundering story. But we have 20 trillion missing from DOD at the same time. You literally have a foreign intelligence agency, according to the chief of staff to the Joint Chiefs, saying, you have a foreign intelligence agency running the Pentagon, which is a little bit scary. But needless to say, if this all comes out now, when you're in the middle of the war and you have Congress, remember the last time Netanyahu addressed Congress, I think it was last year, he got 54 standing ovations. He got so many standing ovations. On one of the last ones, he told everybody to stop clapping because they were interrupting his speech. It's kind of funny. So you're talking about something that could wreak havoc with relationships and allies right in the middle of what is clearly around the globe a very sensitive time for the dollar syndicate. And so before I go on to my third point, Carolyn, anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I'd like to turn to Polly, the man on the street representative who isn't intimately familiar with all of this, and ask Polly whether this all makes sense to her and if she has any questions.
Well, it does make sense. I mean, I'm still stuck on the control files, and I'm thinking, so that's blackmail. And with AI now, they can actually control you they can make you look like you're doing anything. So you're stuffed, really. Unless you
Right.
just
Could even be fake.
Yeah.
Could even be fake, yeah.
So I don't think they can do anything. So for everybody to know, I had Polly watch The Capture, which is a remarkable BBC 2-season series that shows you how they can use deep fakes.
Yeah.
Now, Carolyn and I have litigated for more than a decade, both litigation and dealing sort of with the financial and tax ramifications, where we had to fight many different false allegations. And what I will tell you is that the law matters. And even, I don't think there's any circumstance, even using AI and all these tricks, that if you handle yourself properly, that they can put you in the corner legally or financially, but you've got to be willing to fight, and it's very hard work. I mean, what I will tell you is most people will not do what Carolyn and I did, because it just takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of it just takes an enormous amount. You have to be really stubborn. That's the only way I could say it. So I don't think, if you look at the gaslighting that has worked for 30 years, one of the reasons we're talking about this is it's starting to unravel. So let me talk about my last point. I think the reason that many people who are in positions of responsibility in the government might not want this disclosed is I think it has the possibility at a moment when the dollar reserve currency status is in flux and people are feeling pretty sensitive about it. I think if the truth about Epstein came out, those files would lead to a truth about the money that's disappeared out the back door in the federal government, and the truth about Operation Warp Speed and why the agency missing $20 trillion is running around demanding we inject mysterious ingredients in people's body, which this administration continues to promote. I think it will help people integrate the dots between the missing money and Operation Warp Speed in a way that really threatens the financial system. It's one thing to manage the dollar successfully. It's another thing to try and manage it when people know your sort of covert tricks. And of course, that covert trick threatens Americans' retirement savings in a very deep and bad way. We don't have a debt problem; we have a robbery problem. And I think if too many Americans connect the dots, many people feel it would be dangerous for the financial system.
So what do people do, Catherine, about, I mean, how can we fight back in this respect?
Okay, well, let me say one other thing before we go on. I spent the last 24 hours talking. I was never involved in what's called Make America Great Again, the MAGA movement, but I know a lot of people who were very involved, including as very large donors. And my understanding from talking with them, but also watching what's happening in social media, is this has been a devastating experience for the MAGA movement. I think the administration, there have been so many things that should have indicated to you that the Republicans were not going to be, when it comes to building the control grid, we're not going to be any different than the Democrats. They were just going to, if anything, build it faster. Particularly, we saw in the big, beautiful bill, the amount of money for surveillance and biometrics and financial repression and control is frightening. So, and I keep waiting for the MAGA people to wake up and realize you're not going to get a lot of change by changing the uniparty member in the box. There's a box, and that box is controlled by a political and economic and legal dynamic, and swinging people back and forth is not going to change it. And yet, the American people spend a fortune of money and time, going around that circle, and for 30 years, Carolyn and I have been saying it's a dead end. But the interesting thing about this one, Polly, is what I'm watching for one of the first times is a lot of people in the MAGA movement are realizing, oh, I was tricked. There's nothing, nothing is going to come from Washington. So I told you when Dennis Kucinich was running in Ohio District 8, he and his team did an analysis of 25 and under voters, and they discovered 4% registered as Republicans, 4% registered as Democrats, and 92% registered as independent or other. And what that says is they've given up on the uniparty. And what I'm seeing coming from the MAGA people is there is a wholesale resignation from the uniparty, which leads us, of course, to what can we do? Okay. And one of the things we can do is we can revisit what in our portfolio brings about real change and real action. Okay. One of the things that brings about real change and real action is when you work with federal, state, and local politicians. There's still some federal politicians who are very good who don't have control files. There's still state and local people who don't have control files. When you work with them, you can still get an awful lot done. We've described it here on Financial Rebellion again and again. But the other thing you can do is you can go through your money and your time, and you can start to shift your time and money away from supporting the institutions that are doing this and start moving your time and money to the institutions that are bringing about real solutions. So, if we've talked about it many times, if everybody in America just had moved all their money, and any bank that was supporting Epstein, or any bank that supported or did the missing money, if they just said, I want nothing to do with you, I'm pulling all my deposits and I'm going to a good bank that didn't do that, you would have a revolution. And so the time has come to say, one, I'm going to shift my time and money, and don't think you're not important, because you are. Everyone counts. But then you start to build resiliency, because the government is not going to come help us. And part of that, the government right now with the big, beautiful bill is accelerating the building of the control grid. We have a wonderful collection at Solari on all the things the administration is doing to build the control grid. And we've talked about a lot of them here on this, on Financial Rebellion, including with Twyla Braz about the Real ID. But what you can do is you can do everything to refuse to support or get yourself in the control grid, get out of the control grid. So on the Financial Transaction Freedom website at Solari, we have numerous compendiums of what you can do to support your state legislators, and the financial transaction freedom that lists all the different things you can do to protect financial transaction freedom, whether you're an investor, whether you're a state legislator, whether you're an individual just consumer or citizen. So there's a wealth of information and scores of things you can do, including my favorite section on this is called Turtling for Cash. We have a wonderful Solari report on how to build cash and build up the analog part of the financial system, because we will, as we've discussed before, if these guys get complete financial transaction control, then we're talking about losing all the health freedoms, all the food freedoms. They will use the financial transaction system for complete control.
Catherine, so going back to the title of this, who controls the control files? Who are they? Who goes? So say I'm someone really big in the government. How do I know I've got a control file? And who comes to me and tells me I have a control file on you?
So everybody has a control file.
Oh.
Everybody. So, so I'm sure Carolyn and I, if you look at all the recorded conversations that the NSA had, you could edit all of my conversations with Carolyn and edit them in a way that would make Carolyn and I look completely ridiculous, right? Now, I would say there's nothing in our control file involving pedophilia or anything like that, but more or less everybody has a control file. Okay, so and as Carolyn and I can tell you, if they don't have one, they'll just make one up, and then you can spend 11 years proving that it's false. But what you can tell, so when you're thinking of political action, what you can do is identify who in the government is behaving. Now, who controls the control files? The intelligence agencies and enforcement agencies generally have the control files or have access to them. So you would expect the NSA, the CIA to have control files, but then the Department of Justice or the FBI to have access. So the FBI could have control files. We've all heard the stories of J. Edgar Hoover with his files of, sort of dirty pictures. That's sort of everybody's first recollection of hearing about control files. But private security firms also have control files. So you will see different battles for control in corporate America. Corporations hire, or investors, big investors, or hedge funds hire private securities firm to go out and create control files on people, sometimes sharing it with the government to try and get enforcement actions happening. So, and there are literally people in business who collect files, because if you can get a lot of the big, the more powerful person, the more dirt you can get on them, that's considered an asset. So if you can collect a file, and there are people who talk about brokering those files as a business.
Oh, so dark.
Catherine, can I just ask you, you've actually been the subject of blackmail anyway, whether it's control files or not. And I'm interested, particularly when you were trying to publish your online book and you got word. Where
Right.
Can you describe where did the word?
Sure. So when I worked at HUD, in fact, the secretary used to say, I'm looking for dirt on you and I'm going to get it. And I said, good luck, you're never going to get it. And they had, during the campaign, I had been raising money for the Republican Party in New York for Bush. And but I had a friend who was raising money for Jesse Jackson. And I had given Jesse Jackson $500. And the only thing they could find on me was this $500 donation to Jesse Jackson. So they ran it in the Wall Street Journal thinking it would cause all sorts of, political problems for me. Of course, everybody who knew me thought it was funny because they understood how it happened. In fact, I'd gotten the head of the Jesse Jackson Finance Committee with the head of Bush's Finance Committee, and they became friends. So it wasn't a problem. But meantime, I can't tell you how it improved relationships for me at HUD with the African American employees. It was quite funny. Anyway, but I remember the secretary saying, I'm going to find dirt, and I would say good luck on that because I was always very careful. I mean, I had a lot of understanding of control files at that point. But anyway, I wrote a book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, and I've tried to publish it 3 times. Every time I've run into incredible sabotage, but the third time I got a series of threats, and they were delivered very carefully and very elegantly, which is one of the reasons I took them seriously. They were sort of 3 messages that you only understand when you stitch them together. And my understanding of those 3 messages is if you publish this in hard copy, we will kill somebody in your family. And they identified, subtly who I think the person was. And so I immediately backed off. I just stopped the effort to publish it in hard copy because I said, my family doesn't deserve that. And I didn't know if they were serious or not, but I thought there was a good enough chance that I wasn't willing to risk it. And that's why you have to be careful when you see somebody in a government position or in a business position behaving in a way that doesn't make sense to you. You have no idea what it's like to be in that position. And, you have no idea what it's like to be sitting here thinking, if I publish this book in hard copy, they could kill somebody I really care about and who's in my family, and I will feel responsible. It's a hideous feeling.
Hideous. I mean, I can't imagine. And do you think that's the kind of thing that's happening at the higher level? That's why people are backing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're talking now about we are talking about the global system. We are looking at mafia wars. And we are looking at mafia wars that involve some of the most dangerous people in the world. So, and right now, well, my entire life, political power on Earth comes from a gun. And the question is always who has the biggest gun? And now, who has the biggest gun is very much caught up with who has the biggest surveillance network tied to invisible weaponry that can literally kill with the push of a button.
And they want to take our guns away.
Well, I think they would love to kill our guns away, and they work very hard to take our guns away. And the reason they can't take our guns away was very interesting. At the beginning of RFK's campaign, I wrote a big article about why you can't take our guns away and sent it to him just to make sure he understood. And one of the things I pointed out when we were traveling together in Switzerland on a speaking tour, he had a wonderful team of security guys with these huge machine guns. And, what I pointed out is, just like the rich and powerful and famous like to have that security, us plebeians like it too. Anyway, but I explained because if you look at why somebody living in Hickory Valley would want a gun, it relates to organized crime networks in our neighborhood and in our area who have air cover from the banking system and the enforcement and intelligence agencies. If you look at how narcotics trafficking works in the United States, read my book, Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, you will connect the dots. But basically, soccer moms can't push Tony Soprano out of their neighborhood because Tony is financing James Bond. And if you look at the stories of the drug running through Mena, Arkansas, the whole Clinton Bush sort of scandal that erupted and was part of the impeachment, you would have these wonderful mothers like Linda Ives who, they're just trying to find out who killed their son. And the next thing you know, they got black helicopters coming down on their head and they can't fathom why suddenly their son's death is a national security issue.
No, a lot of people though are just so frustrated by the whole of the, I get everything you said. Everything you said makes complete sense. And I'm so pleased about the control files. I needed to hear that because it's frustrating. So the bottom line is the people in power, as in government, our presidents and the people with top jobs like Bobby and stuff, they're not in control, right?
I'm going to be a bad guy.
Please.
I am now going to be a bad guy. Let's talk numbers.
Okay.
So I'll never forget being at a Christian revival in 1998. And I was there with my church. and the minister who was teaching me spiritual warfare. And you got 100,000 women in the Georgia Dome, and the pastor brings in George W. Bush by monitor, and everybody jumps up cheering, including my minister, whose son used to work at the DEA, or she used to work at the DEA, and there's nothing about, Bush family or Clinton family narcotics trafficking and U.S. intelligence agency trafficking that she doesn't know. And I turned and I said to her, wait a minute, I just risked my life trying to stop narcotics trafficking by the Bushes and the Clintons, and you're jumping up and cheering for him. And she said, well, he's going to be the winner. And I said, so he's a winner and I'm a loser. And she said, yeah, that's right. Now, what I have to tell you is we've been on this journey for decades. You with respect to vaccines and the poisoning of our children, Carolyn and I with respect to financial fraud and financial freedom. And what I have to tell you is the general population supports the criminals. I mean, this is just like the story of crucifixion. Pontius Pilate knows it's bad politics to crucify Jesus, and he offers the crowd a choice, and they choose the criminal. Okay? Now, if you talk to the guys, so I used to work with the very top of the financial system, the people who ran the financial system from behind the scenes. And you would not believe the sadness they felt because they could never get the general population to support the financial responsible solution. They would almost always support the criminals, the guy who gave them the biggest check. So, I may have to tell okay, so Lou, can we play the red button story again? I'm just going to play it again because I think I'm going to keep playing it until everybody gets this in their spirit.
The red button. You never want to have an epiphany in the middle of a speech. But I did. In the summer of 2000, I was speaking to a wonderful group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. And they have a conference once a year to talk about how they can help evolve our society spiritually. So they're very dedicated, wonderful people. A friend of mine had asked me to give a speech called How the Money Works on Organized Crime. And in the middle of the speech, I was describing the fact that a reporter who I was doing research for had been told by the Department of Justice that the U.S. economy and financial system launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money. So I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, what would happen if we stopped laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all dirty money? So we had a little interaction, and they said, well, the stock market would go down because that money would leave and go to Hong Kong or Singapore or Zurich, and we'd have trouble financing the government deficit because we would offend the people who control that money and the accumulated capital for many years thereon. And so our government checks might stop or our taxes might go up. So I said, okay, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern. And if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your community, your state, your country tomorrow, thus offending the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion of annual dirty money. And so I said, who here will push the button? And out of 100 people, only one would push the button. And I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our mutual funds and our IRAs to go down in price. We don't want our government checks to stop, and we don't want our taxes to go up. And so that's what I call the red button problem. And what the Solari mission is about how do we turn the red button green? In other words, how do we make money pushing the red button? Because if we can make money pushing the red button, then we can push the red button.
So we're the problem.
So we're the solution.
Yes.
And the solution starts by facing the fact that each one of us is financially dependent on a model that is dependent on organized crime and warfare. And and what we can do is come clean. We have a great article at Solari called Coming Clean, where we talk about how to just, in 1998, I'm writing a check on JP Morgan Chase Private Wealth Division, and I froze and I said, why am I banking at the bank that's doing all this mortgage fraud? And I said, I've got to come clean. And so since then, I've been doing everything I can to reduce my dependency on the whole game, the whole net. I want nothing to do with it, and to and that's what I've been doing. And it's a lifelong process. You just, as we call it, it's turtling. You just gotta, but get it out of your life, because remember, we are feeding the machine, and the more we withdraw from the machine and stop feeding the machine, the weaker the machine gets. But the doorway that we have to walk through is facing the fact that we've all been part of this. And politically, what Americans have always signaled to Washington is just, we want our check and we want the story of I'm good. We're going to Iraq not to get their oil revenues deposited in the New York Fed. We're going to Iraq to help women and make the world free for democracy, right? So we want the story of why we're good, and then we want the check, and we don't want to know.
Well, there's lots we can do. So fight on, people. Now, we do have a song to play out this show with that Catherine and Carolyn have put forward. I found this show fascinating indeed. So I hope our viewers have too. Anyway, we're playing the song. And any last words before we play the song?
Well, I think it's very important, whatever happens, we have to keep our state of amusement, which is why I'm so glad we're going to play this song. Perfect example.
Could
right?
could I just say that to the Maha crowd, to the extent that they're watching this, that if you want to know why somebody says things that make all the sense in the world and reveals things to you, and then gets in a political position to make a difference, you think, and you want to know why you're seeing different things and saying the things you know that person would like to do, not happening, listen to this show again.
Right. Okay, well, let's play the song, and then we're going to go to our unvaccinated story. But we'll be back with Financial Rebellion next Thursday, and I'll be back from DC, which we're going to hear about more tomorrow with Brian Hooker, and we will cover that and then go into our show next week. So pray big, stand firm from Catherine, Carolyn, and myself, and we'll see you next week.
You got your bucket list, your grocery list, your list of things to do. You got a list of all your wishes, that's a wish list, dude. You got your Amazon and Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy too. But I know a list that don't exist, and buddy, so do you. It's the Epstein list, it's a mystery list, but the twist is a myth of a list that we all just missed. Be an optimist, not a pessimist. If you wish to persist, it's probably best to forget that list. Now what were we talking about? I don't remember, but I can sleep a lot better at night. Yeah, life can just go along. Knowing there's 10,000 hours of sunshine and flowers and nobody doing a damn thing wrong. Hear no, see no, damn Bongino, cash Patel. Well, I wouldn't want to be a sweating man with bulging eyes. Now tell me them fellas ain't compromised. Any implicated dude will tell you. Anybody on the big list knows just how far the folks in charge will go to keep the status quo. So when the war bell rings, the song that they'll sing is a song that we well know. I-oh, so it's off to war I go. Well, they said it's gonna fix it, but now they're all complicit. They-oh, 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 they-oh. So it's off to war we go. Send the poor off to war, what else are we for? They-oh, 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 they-oh.
This is a happy story, everyone, so just enjoy this moment. Tell everyone your name, yeah.
My name is Selene Jones. I am the local chapter leader for the Weston A. Price Foundation, which is an ancestral foodways and lifeways and nutrition education organization. And I'm the mother of 2 toddlers, almost 2 and just turned 4.
Okay, so talk about the first question, I think, is why would you not vaccinate your children?
Well, my entryway into natural mothering was home birth, because I was friends with a home birth midwife. And so about 10 years before I even had kids, I knew that I'd be giving birth at home. And I knew how physiological birth is so different from birth in a hospital. And that was really my gateway to consider a lot of what I was doing in the rest of my life, including my nutrition. And I also became friends with another just local woman who was a hospital midwife, who since then has left that system. But she taught me a lot about ancestral nutrition, and she introduced me to the Weston A. Price Foundation. And it actually, for me, spurred a lot of culinary memories about my own Slovakian and Ukrainian heritage. And so I recognized like the fatty fish and the organ meats and the bone broth and the sauerkraut and the yogurt, and all of that was like second nature to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is what my grandmother used to feed me. And that is in fact how this works, is that these things are cultural memories carried forward from ancient cultures to today of what keeps us healthy, fertile, and staves off disease. And so from there, I became, involved in the local chapter. And when the chapter leader moved, I became the local chapter leader. And so now my role is to help people find the local natural raw foods that our ancestors ate in this area in Western Pennsylvania. And so the Weston A. Price Foundation is pretty explicitly vaccine critical. And so that was by then a comfortable role for me. Slowly over the years, I guess I would say in political discussions on Facebook, I grew bolder because I could see that other people did not have the confidence to actually speak out loud what they were seeing or hearing. And I even have several friends that I tried to convince to come today who have had significant vaccine injuries in their lives. Like one old roommate of mine spent 2 separate years of her life in a wheelchair after receiving flu vaccines. Yeah, I guess she had Guillain-Barré. I've known other people who have had significant injuries, and some of them chose to keep vaccinating. And so not everybody is really ready to state out loud and put their name and their face behind their own actual experiences. And so I figured that, although I don't know if I'm the right person to do that, that I would step forward and start talking about it. And I did. And pretty quickly I realized that kind of wasn't enough. I had to find a way to try to serve my community. And so that's why I got involved with the foundation, and why I show up to events like this.
Now, let's talk about your children. You've got 2.
Yes.
2 years and 4 years.
That's right.
Boys or girls?
The 4-year-old is a boy, and the almost 2 is a girl.
Okay, and how is their health? Do they have seizures?
No.
Ear
no, in
infections?
fact, they've kind of really never been sick, like as other people would say that children get sick. I mean, what I've noticed from sort of just casual exposure to normal families who do all the medical interventions is that it seems like people think it's normal for your baby to be sick a couple times by the time they're 1. I guess to me that's really not normal, because my children, I guess maybe they've had like 1 day's worth of a sneeze or a tummy ache, perhaps like once or twice, but until we all had COVID, for whatever you want that to mean, last June, they had never been sick until they were, in their toddler years. As infants, they were never sick. They have never had ear infection, never been on antibiotics, never had any pharmaceuticals or any kind, and they've really kind of never been sick, such that we had to take much of a break from our lives or do any interventions for them at all.
So what if they are, playing with other kids and that the other kids are sick?
Yeah.
Do your kids just not get sick or what?
Mostly not. I mean, I guess if we hear somebody's sick, we kind of stay away, because what I try to teach them is that part of staying healthy is actually resting and staying home when you're sick. I think that's one of the reasons that people today are also so sick, is that not only do they fill their bodies with junk, but they don't know how to really respect their body's natural rhythms and take a break. And when somebody is feeling sick, where they should be is at home. And so when I hear somebody sick, I just go, we'll take your time then, and we'll see you next time. If they have been around sick kids, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't really seem to happen. I mean, nobody's ever sneezed in anyone's face, but like, who knows which of these things are true anyway? And no, I couldn't honestly say that it really phases me that much.
How important is food? Let's talk about this for a second, because a very well-known doctor in our movement would say, if you're going to fill your child with junk food, you might as well vaccinate. That would be her line. She was just like, it's no good just not vaccinating and then eating junk.
Right. Well, luckily, most people who are exposed to one thing are exposed to many, and they start to realize, too, that community is the key to actually making these lifestyle choices work, because you need to know who else is homeschooling, where to get natural meat, how to find raw milk, and that's part of what we do. But the most important ingredient in the success of mothers is other mothers when it comes to making natural lifestyles a reality. And so, yeah, basically sticking together is a major ingredient.
Another question, just randomly here. So I was talking to someone yesterday who's got severe allergy to, dairy. Can they have raw milk? Is raw milk?
They would have to see. I would say at some point in their healing process they can, yes, but it may not be right away. So pasteurization is a temperature much higher than cooking, and it denatures the proteins and changes them so that they're highly inflammatory. And instead of absorbing them as our bodies, would otherwise do with not denatured milk proteins, your body starts to create pus, and as soon as it moves through your digestive tract, your body is almost trying to create insulation and saying, get this pasteurized dairy out of there. Whereas raw dairy is actually, a probiotic superfood. And if you think about it, all mammals' first food is milk. We're designed to digest milk. Now, the cow milk protein is larger and a little harder to digest, so that may not be someone's first stop if they're having any trouble. Usually goat milk is considered closer to the human protein in milk, so if you're going to try a raw dairy that you think you may be sensitive to, try goat before you try cow, and that's fairly widely available as well. Realmilk.com is a global directory of raw milk providers that, hopefully you can find one within driving distance. And we get ours about once a week. We go through about 4 gallons a week, and it's super delicious and fresh and wonderful. And it so happens that here in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of kind of dairy agriculture and Mennonite and Amish agricultural producers that are small but big enough to really distribute. And so we buy our raw dairy from a business called The Family Cow, which delivers using the Joel Salatin van system all over the state. And so we get it fresh every week. And in addition, these people, believe it or not, because they were so sick of hearing the message that, raw milk is dangerous, which statistically is not true, they built a little lab on their property, and now they test every batch before it goes out. So you can't actually get diseases from their milk because they test for them and they're not there.
Another question, something I'm seeing out on the road, is we are seeing completely unvaccinated children with some issues, and their parents claim that they're on this organic diet. How much of the mother's previous vaccine or gut-related issues do you think plays a part in that? We're just trying to get to the bottom of
yes,
that.
I've actually been looking into that kind of stuff myself. I've been reading kind of books about the function of the liver, and we've had a little bit of that in our family. My kids do have like a tiny bit of rashiness once in a great while, and I've seen that they react to eggs. Now, they've never been vaccinated, but a lot of people who have been vaccinated, I guess, have the same reaction to eggs, which is an ingredient in some vaccines. And egg white, when it's raw in particular, is, I know, an allergen that kind of spurs a lot of skin reactions and eczema in people. My kids' skin stuff is very mild and very occasional, and if I can avoid raw eggs, because I really go crazy with the ancestral cooking, so I'll make homemade mayonnaise using raw egg yolks, or egg whites rather. The whites are the difficult to digest part. But so they've been exposed to raw egg whites and had a little rash, but otherwise I would say they're pretty allergy free and skin issue free. But I do, my own conclusion about that for myself and my kids was that yes, probably there was residual liver toxicity in me a little bit that would have been responsible, since they haven't really been exposed to anything like that.
Yeah, so
it may not be totally avoidable, but it's treatable. And as with the mother, the child, you can detox people's livers so that the long-term storage is released and expunged and absorbed by the binders that you can kind of take while you're doing a mild detox of some kind. And after that, which is something that a naturally minded mother can easily manage at home. It's not rough or hard on the child's system, and that basically can take care of things like that. It's not a lifelong sentence. Pharma would love us to believe that these things are lifelong sentences, but they're just not. If you know how to restore balance in your body and go with its natural processes, you can get back to that balance pretty quickly.
So if you or your kids, and you don't have to answer any of these questions, I'm just fascinated, and I'm really asking the questions that people are talking about on the road. So if you and your children do get a sore throat, your glands are up a bit in your neck or whatever, and you're starting to feel congested, how would you treat that in your household? And by the way, everyone, of course, Children's Health Defence does not give out medical advice.
Right. And neither does the Western Price Foundation.
There you go.
What would I do? I guess if I had a mild sore throat, I'd probably, give them a little vitamin C, natural vitamin C. I would say take a rest, drink some bone broth, some soup or some tea or something, herbal tea. And I would just basically, we would do like a few hours of rest, and that's generally like all it would take, I think.
Steamy showers, you put the shower on when I was a little girl?
Yes.
That's what they used to do?
Yes, totally.
Run the bathroom all moist and you sit in there and breathe.
Yeah, they also sell, like kind of a natural Vicks that's just a little bit of essential oils in like a beeswax balm. And some people think that essential oils are endocrine disruptors, so they try to totally stay away from them. I don't really take a hardline stance on that personally, but I don't also use them all the time, which I kind of do think is bad. So we have kind of, we do like a balance of vitamins, herbs, supplements, things like that. But my children are so little and they've been so healthy that really we don't do too many interventions. We just try to keep them really well nourished and hydrated. And when they're, not maybe in their top form, they rest. And that's all it takes.
Rest. Okay. And so do your children are 2 and they're 4, do they speak or make?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, my God, yes. No, they could hold, because they were born in a really natural context with no medication added to their birth process, they both lifted their heads and like looked around and were totally alert and interactive from the moment they were born. And we viewed that as very precious, and we noticed how different it was from most babies that you meet. Because like people are used to infants being like these unresponsive lumps that don't have any visual cues, and that's just not what an infant really is like. An infant is really a person who's reactive and can tell you what they think if you're paying attention from the moment they're born.
So I spoke to another young girl the other day, and she actually said to me, my dad said that if I ever get pregnant and give birth at home, he would call the police.
So that happens to a lot of people. It really does, because people think they're helping. They think they're rescuing. And in fact, believe it or not, I have a friend in one of my like natural mom networks who, I'll not share her name obviously, but a little bit of her story is that she was trying to have a baby at home, and she began to bleed a little bit in a way that was not normal. She was close to being done and felt sure after her, she had 5 kids and this was her 6th, that she felt sure that she would be done soon and wanted to continue, and she felt that was safest for the baby, which was in transition and on its way out. And when that is happening, what you don't want to do is retard that process and keep the baby in, because then it becomes maybe an oxygen issue. So she was already bleeding. She's like, okay, let's get this baby out. But someone called the paramedics. She actually still doesn't know who, which is really tragic. And what happened is they forcibly sedated her and took her with them. And at that point, she's very religious. She just said, let go and let God. Like, I can't control this. They're taking me now. And I feel certain that those people must have known that actually what they were doing, they thought they were bringing her and her baby to the hospital to be saved, but they really didn't use their heads, because they don't know, how long a baby can survive halfway out of the womb with no oxygen. So this baby died. And this woman was like, this was not my choice. Someone did this to me, and these paramedics were brought in to save me, and they actually killed my child. I feel like that's maybe a slightly more extreme story than is usually heard in these cases. But being plugged into these communities, I hear stuff similar all the time, where somebody's neighbor thinks they're helping, somebody's parent thinks they're helping. In fact, it's very often the people closest to you that have the most stake in trying to shift your choices and chase you out of your natural lifestyle, where you're happy and healthy and doing fine. And they'll do something like send the police to your birth. And luckily, in most cases, the protocol is for them to kind of like stand down if nothing's actually wrong. And they do kind of like go away. And they don't have time to sit around. So once you've said no thanks, usually they'll leave. But there are those who maybe don't have a lot going on that day, and maybe in jurisdictions where the rules aren't so clear, that those people will kind of try to take over your situation. And as everyone who's kind of researched this knows, your nervous system feeling at peace, which is why you're at home in the first place, is the key ingredient to the natural progression of labor. Hormonally, that's what your body wants to do, is be at home, be safe, is like number 1, feel safe. And then your body knows to release your baby, and the chain of events happens so that you release your baby. So that's kind of what you really want to shoot for. And obviously those who think they're helping you by inserting strangers with bright lights and scary equipment into your situation, all they've really done is actually ruin your birth.
I could talk to you for ages. I love this conversation.
Oh, thank you.
I do realise that we're very behind on time outside. But what's your advice to families getting ready for the winter? What's ahead with all kinds of craziness?
Oh my gosh. Well, you're wanting to know about COVID measures, and I would say just be honest, stand your ground, and don't be afraid to go where you want to go. But what I want to talk about when it comes to preparing for the winter is buy a freezer. Learn your local farmers. Call me if you want, and contact the Weston A. Price Foundation. We'll help you find local sources of beef and local, CSAs, community supported agriculture, that goes into the fall. And with a freezer and maybe a little canning, you can actually feed your family over the winter from local sources without buying tropical avocados and crazy fruit. You can actually know your farmers. You can know the names of the cows that you're eating. Like, you literally can, and it's not that hard. And I wish I'd done it years ago. I would advise anyone who's thinking about it to start today.
Thank you so much, just for, was a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'm
Likewise.
so pleased that you have these wonderful, healthy children.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for all that you do, Polly. It's an honor to meet you.
Well, it's Children's Health Defense, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with you guys.
That's right. That's true.
So we are one big family.
That's right.
All right.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.